Welcome back to the rules of engagement. Before I jump into analysis on game number 4 between Bomber and Goswser, let me remind you guys, if you're unsure about what career you want to get in the future, you're looking at potential colleges, potential different educational programs. If you're considering getting a job in the game design industry or the esports industry, be sure to check out your options at Full Sail. www.fullsail.edu/MLG. They offer a lot of different programs in game design, audio engineering, video production, 3D animation. A lot of cool stuff that once you get the education, it can launch you into a career in the entire game development industry, which is a very, very big industry. A lot of great careers there. So, it only takes a few minutes. Check it out. It could be something you're interested in pursuing. Now let's talk about Bomber vs. Goswser, game number 4. A couple things I want to talk about in this game are going to be pre-medevac marine pressure, or marine water, any type of pre-medevac bio pressure, basically. Then we're going to talk about advancing onto creep as Terran, and some things to keep in mind if you're going to decide to do such a thing, which you will if you want to attack. And then we're going to talk about late game drop play, and some key things to utilize and defend against such drop play. So we're going to jump this game at the 5-minute mark. And one thing we'll notice here, Bomber, of course, did an expansion build, right? Expansion. But he's going up to 4 barracks before anything else, right? So he's going to get a lot of Marines early. If you're going to get a lot of Marines early, there's no reason to do so unless you want to put on some pressure. Obviously, given the fact he doesn't have a factory being built, he's going to get a lot of Marines before he has any tech to support them. So it's a pre-medevac timing. I'm going to look at him develop this timing. If you do such a timing, you almost always going to get combat shields. Now you say, why combat shields and not stim? Isn't stim better? Stim takes a full minute longer to research than combat shields, and your timing will often be too late, and your opponent will have way too many units when stim hits. Combat shields, it just hits at just the right time when you have enough Marines that you can really overwhelm Zerglings very easily, but you can still ideally hit before Banings or Roaches are out. And this is why this tactic is a really good tactic to utilize in the hopes that you catch your opponent off guards. Like I said before, if they see you moving out, as a Zerg player just sees you right now, for example, and they don't have a Baning Nest or a Roach Warren that can only make speedlings, it's very hard to beat this many Marines cost efficiently with just speedlings. Unfortunately, Goswser already has a Roach Warren. It's something he's built, and this is where this attack kind of runs into trouble. You can sometimes get easy wins by catching your opponents off guard, but in general, going for Marine pressure without medevacs will put you behind if your opponent is ready for it. Because with Roaches or Banings, they can often defend this pressure without too much of a problem. If they defend it, you've delayed your tech, you're behind in tech, you lose the ability to do early drops, your opponent has free reign of the map for a little while. It's not like you lose the game by any means. You're just going to be just a little bit behind if your opponent defends this attack very cleanly. Goswser defends it pretty cleanly, loses 3 queens. So actually that's kind of important that he got those queens, because that limits Goswser's ability to take advantage of map control, given his limited larva count. But it still puts Bomber a little bit behind. We can see here Bomber's behind in food supply, and he's lost map control, so it's going to be harder for him to do anything to scare his Goswser. Now, going forward, of course, because he's behind, he's just going to kind of sit back, macro up, try to get some tanks. He can put the tanks, notice he can put them behind bunkers, take a third base, play very defensively. Meanwhile, Goswser, of course, has already proceeded to drone up heavily because he knows there's no threat over the next minute. Up to 75 drones versus only 58 SCV, 61. Now, of course, the triple mules, it's not that really big a deal for Bomber. Now Bomber's going to start to initialize some of this draw play, but Goswser with knowing that there's no threat of a frontal attack right now, should be able to defend these drops without too much of a problem. Spines, queens, speedings everywhere. Ideally, he really would be a little more on top of stopping this, but it's not doing too much damage, just killing the gas. So speedings should deny this. Another drop over here, but again, denied, doing a little more damage than it should have. But it's still not that big a deal. Goswser is going to proceed into mid-game. About even in food, but he's also saving up a lot of money right now to invest in either the Spire Tech or the Infestor Tech that he's going for. Now, as you go through this, there comes a point when Bomber, having seen the fact that Hive's on the way, having seen the fact there's no mass Roach baiting attack, means that Bomber really knows that Goswser is investing in tech, and Bomber wants to put forth some pressure before said tech really kicks in. So he's going to want to push out and do some damage. Now his army is getting pretty strong. He's approaching 2-2-1 upgrades. It's a very standard timing. So as he's moving out, here comes the next part that's tricky, is Terran. When you're off creep, you're usually pretty safe because Zerg units move slow. Specifically, the Banings are much easier to micro against. But as you push out and you start wanting to move on creep, right? We can see here he's going to start pushing out here. He's starting to move on creep. This is where it's very, very important to be careful, right? Especially you have tanks. As soon as you think there's a possible threat for the Zerg player, what do you notice Bomber doing? He says, okay, there might be a potential to be attacked. What am I doing? Oops, sorry guys. What is he doing right here? Notice that he's leapfrogging the tanks. What that means is that he's keeping some of the tanks, right, these guys over here, in siege mode, while the other tanks push forward, right? And then what's going to happen? These tanks here will siege mode to make sure he's safe from a baiting attack, while these tanks then move forward. So you always have some of your tanks in siege mode, so you can never be caught with all your tanks on siege. If you're caught with all your tanks on siege, we saw that on Neo Planet S, you can really be slaughtered by baitings, especially when you're on creep and those units move much, much faster. So it's very, very important as Terror when you push out on the map, do the leapfrog technique. We can see that here. These tanks stay sieged. When these tanks start to siege up now, right, then he can start to unsiege these if he wants to, but this is actually when Goswser decides to attack, and he has a lot of siege tanks, so he defeats his attack very, very well. Goswser is also a little bit, his units weren't really all set up ideally. I think what happened there is Goswser didn't realize there's those 4 tanks back there, and that's why he wanted to get the engagement before those reinforcements came in. But going forward, Bomber's going to take out his 4th base. Goswser should defend the drop play. But just taking out the 4th base doesn't mean Bomber all of a sudden wins, right? Remember, Goswser has a lot of tech going. Greater Spire's on the way. Adrenal Glands, he's got Infestors. And all this does is it equalizes the base count. So yes, Bomber may be slightly ahead at this point, but by no means is the game over. Goswser has proven that he's a very, very strong player, and he did take out a lot of those drops. So going forward now, he's going to try again to push this attack back. Takes out a few units. A fairly even trade for both players. Bomber's going to try to slowly push again. This time he's unsieging a little bit too much, but the scan ahead reveals that Bomber was, or Goswser was retreating, so it's safe to do so. Now, notice how he starts to siege some of the tanks. He always keeps at least a couple tanks sieged up. Now sieging more tanks up. That's a leapfrog technique because now he knows there's a potential for Goswser to engage him. We're going to go forward here, of course. He's going to try to push before the Brood War is complete. Goswser, of course, is going to try to do what he can to stall that attack until these Brood Wars complete. Once they complete, as long as he has a couple good fungals left, he should be able to push this attack back. That's exactly what he does. Bomber's forced back by this combination. And of course, Bomber is going to again deny the 4th base over here. But remember, it's still 3 base to 3 base. Goswser has great tech. By no means is it totally game over. So as we progress into the game, Bomber now has to realize, okay, this guy's not going anywhere anytime soon. He has Infestors, Brood Lords, Corruptors. I put on enough pressure to deny him the bases he needs to get a really strong high-tech army, but he's still been able to hold his 3 bases the whole time. He's still developed a good army, and if I look at myself, right, my main's mining out, my natural's pretty much mined out, my 3rd is actually very close to being mined out, so really I have to take my 4th base, maybe adopt a little bit of a defensive posture for a brief moment to collect myself, get my economy back on track, and then resume the pressure to try to keep Goswser from really taking that 4th base. So this is where it becomes really, really tricky. This is the point in the game. If you look at Goswser, he has a very, very cost-efficient army in frontal engagement with the Infestors and, of course, the Brood Lords, wherever those are, or Ultralists, whichever tech he wants to go. He has Ultras Cavern as well, 3 Ultras on the way. But because he's been on 3 base for so long, he's short on Larva, and he's short on a lot of extra minerals. So all of a sudden, the drop play starts to become a problem. This is exactly why Bomber is utilizing the drop play, because he knows that Goswser is short on Larva, short on minerals, the 2 things that he needs to produce a ton of speedlings and to deal with this drop play. So he's going to continue to utilize this drop play to great effect. Meanwhile, you know, this is actually not good for these Vikings, potentially. Those can get chain fungal to death. But a drop play is being really, really, really effective at keeping Goswser from really establishing a 4th base. Of course, he's able to get this 4th base here, but again, more drop play. Goswser is going to try to react. But if he can continue to do so, right, we've noticed the damage to the main. The Greater Spire was taken out. A lot of damage being done by this drop play. What's the best way to deal with this as Zerg? In the late game, when you get there, that's where you need to really start putting down your stack defense. If you want to push out to deny the Terran their 4th base, or their 5th base at this point, actually, this point in the game, if Goswser can deny the 5th base, he's actually going to be great, because then Bomber will only be on 1 base, and if he lands all his mules at the 1 base, that'll actually mine out very fast. So even denying the 5th base would be great, but to do so, he needs to be safe from these drops back at home. That's exactly why you want to get a lot of stack defense. Stack defense is a very, very efficient way to defend these drops if you build enough stack defense. Then you can use your whole army in the battle. And why is it important? Well, let's take a look here. What is Goswser's food at? It's at 200, right? He's at 200 food. So that's his maximum army is 200 food. If he's busy putting Zerglings back here, Banelings back here, Infestors back here, his main army gets weaker, and it's much, much harder to stop Bomber's army. It's much harder to launch attacks to kill his planetary fortress if he has to keep all his units back to defend drops. Exactly what he's doing here is perfect. He has the minerals, right? Build spine cores, then you can use your whole army to deny them their extra base. But if you don't have all the spine cores available, right? What happens is this happens. Your opponent can drop this base, and all of a sudden you have to have your Infestors back here. You have to have your Zerglings back here to deny the drop play, because there's no spines defending this base. A drop play could also come in a natural. There's so many key tech buildings here with only a single spine and spore. The main as well, the hives there, only a single spine core. So as it gets to the late game, try to utilize more stack defense as it doesn't cost supply, so you can have a very strong army on attack. Imagine this army right here if he had those 7 Infestors. He could just fungal this, kill it, and the planetary would die shortly afterwards. And if he kills this base again, remember, Bomber's down to a single mining base that he's going to mine out very fast if he has to drop all his mules there instead of dropping the mules here. Now, of course, without the fungals, you get this situation where the bio can kite backwards. They can pick off the Broodlords. Just kiting backwards alone is effective enough that also uses all your cost efficiency. They can drag you back into their additional reinforcements, and you're going to keep losing stragglers and stragglers and stragglers as you chase them. He is actually maybe going to still take out his planetary. No, not. Yeah, he should be still taking out his planetary, but he's taking severe losses while doing so. And in addition, while doing so, he's lost this base to a drop again because he lacked a proper stack defense. And now, because he's lost so many units, he's lost his base. He has to spend all of his units to just replenish his army, and he can't even do it. He's stuck at 176 food in a very, very poor spot. And if you can see, we're just jump forward. Because of this, he's lost the economy. He's lost his bankroll because no stack defense in his 5th base, and no convincing win down here due to the lack of fungals because, again, the Infestors were stuck on drop defense. This next army is much, much harder to stop here. We can actually, we can almost even stop the game right here because we can pause it and we can look at the situation, right? What's the situation? Bomber's maxed out, has plenty of bank, right? He's got a really nice bankroll up here. He's got 2,000 minerals and about 700 gas. He's got a very high-tech army. He's got 5 bases established. Goswser's really struggling to take that 5th base. His army has to be spread out to defend drops, which means he can't stop the frontal assault from Bomber, and he goes ahead to lose the game. So the Zerg player, very, very important. In the late game, once you're maxed, and you know that you want to use your full army to deny Terran bases and also to squash their army cost efficiently, that means you really got to use more stack defense to defend drops. This also applies to you Terrans and Protosses. In the late game, especially TVT, try to put a lot of missile turrets up to help defend against the Doom drops. Against Protoss, make sure War Prisms can't get into your main. That way you can have all your units on your army. As Protoss, use cannons, because if you're maxed out and a Terran is a drop, you can't warp in reinforcements because you're maxed out. So you got to use a little bit more cannons in the late game to ensure that you have the maximum army available for those really important game-determining battles. So wraps up the analysis on game number 4 between Goswser and Bomber. Take a short break and be right on to the Q&A.